Folks, we get another round of applause for Time After Time. So great to see that on the big screen after so long. Well, folks, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome tonight's guest and talk to him for a bit. So please join me in a round of applause for welcoming screenwriter and director Nicholas Meyer. Thank you for joining us.
It's a thrill.
Thank you, thank you. Just show of hands again for Nicholas. Who saw this for the first time tonight? That's wonderful. So just an absolute pleasure to be able to introduce the film to you. I always like to start with a question from the audience. So someone out there has been sitting on a question they've been burning on all night. I'm going to start with you right there. Mm-hmm.
My question is, how did you find the book originally in order to do the adaptation?
It's a little more complicated than that. The movie came about because after my novel, The 7% Solution, which is Holmes meets Sigmund Freud, was on the bestseller list, or we were making it into a movie. I can't remember the exact sequence of events, but I got a phone call from a man I went to college with at the University of Iowa. We were in the writer's workshop. He was in the graduate program. I was in the undergraduate program. And I knew him slightly. And he said to me, I'm writing a novel which is kind of inspired by the 7% Solution. I have 65 pages and an outline. Would you read it and tell me what you think? And in those days, I had time on my hands. I said, okay. So I read what he wrote, the 65 pages and sort of the outline, and I gave him a whole bunch of notes, what I thought. And then I sort of thought no more about it, except I kept thinking about it, because I would never have come up with this cockamamie idea in a gazillion years. I don't get ideas, I just recognize them when I fall over them. And so I was thinking about this, and one of the things I thought was that it's inherently a more visual idea than a literary idea. That the idea of these two guys in Victorian outfits running around in a world where everything is sci-fi without spending any money on sci-fi. And I don't know how many people here have ever seen the Jean-Luc Godard movie called Alphaville. Anybody seen Alphaville? Okay, so you know it's the same idea. When I saw Alphaville in Iowa City when I was at school, and in that movie, everything has a sci-fi name, even though it's just a regular thing. Somebody says, hand me that communicator, and they give them a book or something. So I thought, yes, this is, not only is it a visual idea, it's an inexpensive visual idea. Maybe it's inexpensive enough that if the screenplay is good enough, they'll let me direct it. Well, I didn't think of it in those. I think what happened was I woke up in the middle of the night and said, "You're an idiot. Option his book." So I called him up and I optioned the book. Then I wrote the screenplay how I wanted it to go. Then I gave him the screenplay, and I said, "Here, put this in. Use anything you want in this script," because I figured they would sort of cross-fertilize and it couldn't do either of us any harm. And that's how it came to be written.
Thank you. I have just a couple questions about the style of the movie. This for me.
I'd be relieved if it had a style. It was the first movie I had.
Well, I mean, and again, it could be me picking up on something, but I felt, and I wondered if this was intent, is that there's a certain timelessness to the style, in the sense of you can only go so far in the 70s to not make it look like the 70s with the clothes and everything, but the movie seems to start with this sort of very dramatic music and these big letters and fog that sort of recalled for me like 1930s sort of horror films. And then later on, the music becomes very melodramatic, and there's a sort of recalled for me 50s and 60s science fiction films, and then sort of more of a melodramatic acting between the couple. And I was wondering, as I'm watching it, if there was an intent in making a movie about time travel to have the film feel stylishly untied to an era, with the music and the aesthetics and the font and the titles and everything, so that it sort of recalls a myriad of eras of film.
First of all, I think it's very problematic to ask artists to evaluate their own work. I don't think we're the best judges of it. There's a Robert Burns poem that goes, "I would to God the gift he give us to see ourselves as others see us." So what you're describing to me is very interesting, but I'm not sure that it was on my mind. The things I do think about the movie, and it's just one more opinion because the artist loses all proprietary authority over his work when it's finished. We're like people who've put messages in bottles and then you throw the bottle out there and hope somebody is going to find it and decipher what's inside. But you're not going to be looking over their shoulder when they do saying, "No, that's not gum, that's gun." People will make of it what they will. But it does seem to me that it's 5 movies, all sort of wrapped in one. It's a romance, it's a comedy, it's a thriller, it's science fiction, and it's a rather modern social commentary, all going on interchangeably. And the more you see the movie, the more different aspects of it sort of jump out at you. It's old-fashioned to the degree that, for example, I wanted the Warner Brothers Shields to come out at you at the beginning, and they hadn't done that in years. And I was told I wasn't allowed to do it, and then I did it, and then they got angry. Because I said, "Your logo looks like something stamped on office furniture." And so I wanted the Max Steiner fanfare. And there was definitely something sort of old-fashioned about my notion. The music, for example, I don't know how many people here know about Miklos Rozsa, who wrote the music. Yeah. Spellbound, Ben-Hur, King of Kings, El Cid, Asphalt, Jungle, 1,000,001 movies, and a lot of hard-boiled film noir, and also a lot of fantasy, Thief of Baghdad. And I thought, okay, this movie story really takes place from H.G. Wells's point of view. He's a 19th century man. So if there was going to be any popular music, that was going to be just another sci-fi effect. But the music was symphonically reflecting his idea, and I wanted somebody who was good with fantasy, and who better than to write The Thief of Baghdad. The other thing is, I really didn't want to compete, and I knew I couldn't compete with George Pal and the special effects for his movie. And I kept thinking, what is time travel? I mean, how can you depict something when nobody knows what it is, other than how he did it, which I can't compete with? And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could turn the whole theater into a radio for just the duration? You put a lot of flashing lights on the screen and we're moving towards something, maybe moving towards that, and then you hear these voices and sound effects. And so it's your imagination that's doing the time traveling. I'm a very big believer in invoking the imaginative participation of audience. All great artistic media rely for their success on something that they leave out. Paintings don't move. Music has no intellectual content. Words are just code on a page. In each case, it's the participation of the viewer, the auditor, that makes the thing come to life. The painting moves when it meets your eye. Beethoven becomes profound when it hits your ear. the words on the page make you laugh or cry when your brain decodes them. Film alone has the hideous capacity to do everything for you. So as a director, I'm always looking for what can you leave out? And then the time travel thing, I thought, let's just, hear the voices and do this with some colored lights, and maybe that'll, pass. And Mickey's music, which was, again, lent the sort of fantasy. So the style is a sort of amalgam of all these higgledy-piggledy influences by somebody who was just saying, well, I kind of like this, and this would be cool, and but it's not like Kubrick, where every frame is down to a. Yeah, I hear you back there.
Well, it's interesting too, because we've had a couple people here who doing a Q&A about their first film, and sort of the conclusion that because it was their first film, they were kind of untethered, and they were able to just experiment and throw their imagination in and sort of play with the form. And I love that you mentioned those things that you left out that were just left in with, especially in the social commentary. You get a quick glance of him noticing a number on the wrist, but there's no need for dialogue about it. He sees it, we see it. It recalls something about that span of time, little moments like that. But I just always admire the social commentary in the film and how it's approached. Any next question? Any questions from the audience? Yes.
So I didn't remember the ending. I saw it in theaters in 1979, and so of course. I was like, is she gonna go or not? And of course, I didn't remember the name of H.G. Wells' second wife then. So we know from stories about Blade Runner, of course, that the studios test endings and demand changes and stuff. So I guess I have questions about. This seems like the right ending, given that it was baked into her very name. Right. But. Do you have any stories about pressure to change it, have her stay? Did anybody say, H.G. Wells did say, what? Do you have any stories about how it tested and what other studios thought?
The ending was never changed. Nobody fucked with the script at all. What is true is that they didn't like the movie. They didn't like the movie at all. And my editor, Don Camburn, who also edited Easy Rider, was on a plane with somebody, and they were talking, what are you working on? He said, I'm working on Time After Time. He said, oh yeah, that's the one they hate. And my executive we had stopped speaking at this point, and then I, added insult to injury because I put the logo and the thing on, and they had said, no, you can't do that, and they had given me a whole bunch of notes, and rightly or wrongly, in a very defensive posture, I ignored these notes. I didn't. And they weren't stupid notes. They hated the score. And they wanted Bill Conti to do the score. And I remember when we were mixing the film, I said to Herb Jaffe, my wonderful producer, I said, we should write a letter to Mickey and tell him how much we love the music for his film. For the film, and then we should publish the letter in the trades. And he said, oh, you're learning. Which is what we did. And then they couldn't take it out. So now they were even angrier. And we had a preview, and normally you go out of town to preview a movie, but one of their notes was, shouldn't she look a little more roughed up? Should we reshoot and make her a little, she'd been through more? And they were probably right. But I was just being pig-headed and very defensive at that point. And I didn't say, no, if they're noticing that, the movie has already, fallen to pieces. So the preview was at Woodland Hills, and I went out earlier in the day and ran a couple of reels to look at it, and it was awful. I thought, well, that's the beginning and the end of my career right there. They were right, I was wrong, and this is a piece of shit. And Malcolm and Mary weren't talking to me anymore because their agent had seen the movie. She didn't like it. So I felt like I was going to my funeral when I drove out the second time. It was about 400 people. A lot of them are obviously industry people. And I was sitting behind Malcolm and Mary. And the movie starts with that shield. And people started cheering for the shield. And then they never stopped through the whole movie. Everything, if you're really smart, and it's obviously a movie for really smart people, which evidently have all convened here, then you're going to get off on, what. So I sat there totally stunned by what was going on. Because 2 hours earlier I was, slitting your wrist time. And I was sitting right behind Malcolm and Mary, and all I saw were two silhouettes staring at each other in disbelief with the screen behind them, going whatever. And at the end of the movie, all the applause and everything, and I looked over at my executive who had been brandishing his sheaf of notes, and he turned them into confetti and threw them up in the air. I think it's fair to say that I learned all the wrong lessons from this experience. Making movies is easy. I could do it, if I could do it, anybody could do it. And I learned in subsequent films that not necessarily so easy. But the Jaffe's, father and son, had taken such good care of me. It was like this red carpet was being unfurled wherever I walked, and they were so helpful because I didn't have a clue what I was doing, or even how that when you've lit one way, you shoot everything in that direction. I'd shoot a scene this way, and I said, well, let's now take a... They said, just a minute. Just a minute. While we're aimed in this direction with all the lights, shouldn't we shoot everything in this day? Oh, good idea. So it was, kind of like that. And as the film went along, as shooting went along, I grew bolder in my choices. You said a minute ago when you started about with your first film, you can be bolder. But I think for me, I can't speak for somebody else's first film, I think I began in a very conservative way. I had a really solid script, I knew that. I had really good actors, and I had a really good crew. And all of that was sort of working for me. I thought if I could just keep the story, the images in focus, this is going to be okay. And I was shooting that way. And then, as it went on, I thought, wait a minute. If you're just going to shoot it like everybody else, then move over and let everybody else shoot it, because the only thing any artist has to offer is themselves. So if you're not going to, and then I got bolder, and Paul Lohman, who used to shoot Robert Altman's movies, would say, Meyer, this time you go too far. And that was when I asked for the giant doorknob. I got bolder. And the other thing that happened, I don't even know what question I'm answering anymore. This was my favorite moment in the movie. We shot a scene with a close-up of Malcolm saying his line, and we broke for lunch. And some guy from way up high where the lights were came down and said, you're the writer of this thing too, aren't you? And I said, yes. And he said, well, if you're asking me, he was saying the wrong thing just now right there. And I said, he was? What should he be saying? And he reprised a line from earlier in the story, which was so brilliant, what he had. And my line was not only wrong, it was like the worst line I ever wrote in my life. It was stupid, it was awful. And I was filled with admiration and sort of stunned by this suggestion. And we'll get to what the line was. I thought, hang on, you're the director, come back and shoot his line, which is exactly what we did. And it's in the movie. And I loved that moment because that man, A, felt interested enough in what we were doing to help it. And B, he felt comfortable enough on my set to help it. Somebody else might have been, fired had they the temerity. And then once that got out to the rest of the crew, I started getting all kind of help. People saying, the focus puller saying, I can program this teletype machine to say there's no H.G. Wells in the United States. And I said, great, let's do that. And so it became a very collaborative effort. So the moment, and you'll understand why this was so brilliant on his part and so stupid on mine, was the police have escorted everybody out of the Wells home. It's just Wells and the landlady. And the landlady says something about, I wonder, how he got out. The coppers looked everywhere. They couldn't find him. And then it was a close-up of Malcolm, and the line in the movie is, when you learn how I think. And that's when he realizes he's down with the time machine. And my line, it doesn't get any better as the years go by. It was something like, under my very nose. And we were very close on his nose anyway. It was like, there was no comparison because we'd had it left over from the chess game. One day I'll win. Yes, when you learn how I think, and so forth.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Yes? Sammy's going to bring up Mike.
What exactly was your most favorite part in creating and filming and directing this film?
Somebody said that making a movie is the biggest set of electric trains that any kid was ever given to play with. I like people. I like working with them. I like the collaborative nature of it. This was a kind of a magical experience for me. It was the only time, or just about the only time, that I completely got to do what I wanted in my own way. And other times, there were sort of leg irons or different things that were keep. At this point, for whatever constellation of reasons, the low budget, people being busy with more important movies, I was just sort of left to my own devices. And it was also a novel experience. I had directed plays. I'd done a lot of writing. I directed radio plays, where you get to edit sound. So I knew about that. What I didn't know really about was the camera. And you can see my camera work compared with Spielberg's, and you understand. He was playing with a camera while I was playing with a typewriter. And you can tell. So if I had a favorite moment in the movie, making the movie, it's the moment I described when this man came down and helped make the movie better in a big way to me. But it was a magical experience, and I went into a real depression when it was over. It was quite a come down. And then after this triumphant Woodland Hills screening, then it went to the Toronto Film Festival. There was 1,500 people going crazy in that screening. And suddenly, I was this big hero. Frank Wells, who was the head of the whole Warner Brothers complex, the day it opened, there were lines around the block, and I was looking at the lines, and suddenly I look, there's Frank Wells, and he comes up to me and says, "Well, I just want you to know that failure is an orphan, but success has many fathers. Congratulations." And then I got a letter from Ted Ashley, who was running the studio at the time, and he had seen the movie. We had shown him the movie. And he had talked on the phone most of the time, and he said, "Great work," and he walked out. We never heard from him again, and then we heard that he didn't like it. And he was shorter than I am. We got a letter from him that said, "Two things I have in common with Fiorello LaGuardia is my height, and when I make a mistake, it's a beaut." He said, "I love this movie," now that he had the courage of the audience's convictions. And so when we had that pinned on our wall for quite a while.
I have one more question, but first, so I'm going to ask the audience, did anyone else notice how extra prescient this film was, that there was a movie on a marquee that comes out next weekend? Yeah, I was at Exorcist 4, that comes out next weekend. That's surreal. I have a question about San Francisco.
Sure.
Just curious to know, if anything, what San Francisco means to you, if it represents anything. You know, the city is so gorgeously shot in this film, and later on in your career, you said another time travel-based movie in San Francisco and featured San Francisco.
Yeah, I said that they still have to go to San Francisco.
I'm wondering, if there is if San Francisco evokes anything to you cinematically or thematically.
Well, a couple things. One is I grew up watching San Francisco in the movies, whether you're talking about The Maltese Falcon or Vertigo, or a lot of movies set in San Francisco, and it's a very photogenic city. I grew up in New York on the island of Manhattan, and in 1971, I think, I drove cross country to seek my fortune in the movie business. I had never been to California to know anybody. But I did have an aunt in San Francisco, and I stayed with her for a month as I discovered the city. And when it came time to write Time After Time, I just put everything I loved from that month in the movie. When I saw it's not the Palace of Fine Arts, but that Panamanian exposition thing with all the pillars and the plaster that was for the Panamanian exposition, I thought, well, I've got to have that, and all the different, and there was a revolving restaurant, got to have that, and so forth. So I just tailored the locations to my favorite places.
Was the original story or the original idea set in San Francisco?
It was set in San Francisco. An interesting thing about that, now that you draw my attention to it, is that there were two ways one could have shot San Francisco. We could have made Wells feel right at home. There are wonderful Victorian buildings, all carefully curated and painted, and then there was things like the Hyatt. And the crazy story about the Hyatt, this is the Hyatt Regency on a Drum, which was designed by Portman, who won this big award for this extraordinary building, which you see also in Mel Brooks' High Anxiety. He shot it as well. But when the lady was showing us, the representative of the hotel on a location scout was showing us this, and I said, gee, this giant atrium looks sort of like that H.G. Wells movie, The Shape of Things to Come. I don't know if you've seen Things to Come. You've seen the astounding resemblance. And she said, oh, that was Mr. Portman's favorite movie. So it really was an H.G. Wells hotel, because William Cameron Menzies, the great art director of Gone with the Wind, did Shape of Things to Come. And he designed that, and Wells was an executive producer or something on it. So it had his imprimatur on both that movie and the design of the Hyatt Drum. So I interviewed a cameraman who wasn't Paul Lohman, and I was talking about how San Francisco was going to look, and he started to push back and say, well, but we could make him feel right at home in Victorian San Francisco. And I thought, if I'm having this argument now, it may not bode well for down the road, because the whole point of the story, as far as I was concerned, was that it was a very special alien landscape. I made the same speech to everybody that I auditioned to work on the movie. I said, number one, I know nothing. So, number two, you're going to have to teach me. Number three, you're going to have to not mind teaching me. And number four, if I still want to do it my way, you don't get to go away angry. And anybody who could withstand that catechism, I said, fine, we'll make you a member.
It was the right call, too, because by making it a fish out of water story, you're also countering his idea that this would be a utopian place.
Well, there's that TV scene in the hotel where all he has to do is swim. What I loved about the whole concept of this, which, as I say, was not my concept, was that I didn't have to editorialize. I just had to show the world as it is. No comment.
Yeah, as I was watching, I'm like, how many banks does the city need? You know, even if whether I was a tip or not, I'm like, how many banks does the city need? And I'm like, well, there you go.
I don't know if that bank building still exists. It was then the Chartered Bank of London, but the architect was a woman, Julia Morgan, who also designed San Simeon.
Any questions? Yes, right there.
Really have to compliment you on that amazing time machine, how different it was from the George Pal version from the early 60s. And I love how you put Argo on the front as the not the machine in the novel. The question is, what were your set of influences for it? Because it sort of predated the steampunk movement by decades. And it's still so beautiful seeing this movie over 40 years later. It is such a joy.
Thank you. I guess the thing I'm proudest of with my best things, you know, all three of them, whatever they were, is that they're kind of built to last. In that sense, I feel good about it. I look at this movie and I don't cringe or whatever. And it doesn't seem dated in any significant way, in the way that really good art doesn't date. Think about Bach and say, oh, it's an oldie but a goodie. It's just great, and it has its own timelessness. The Time Machine was inspired by one of my all-time favorite movies, which is the Walt Disney 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now that movie, which I believe to this day is the best Disney movie ever made, was the Nautilus was designed by a man who didn't get credit for it. Harper Goff, thank you very much. And Harper Goff said to Walt Disney, he said, that in the novel, the Nautilus is described as looking like a cigar. He said, no one's going to want to look at a cigar for 2 hours. And he said, but it's also described as being mistaken for a sea monster. So let me fiddle with that. And he came up with the Nautilus. And I grew up, somebody left me in a theater for 3 days with that movie. And that became the mother ship. I mean, I just totally bonded with it. I own a very large, full, scale model of Harper Goff's steampunk masterpiece. And when it came time to design this, I said to Ed Carfagno, who was my production designer, who also designed Ben-Hur and Joseph Mankiewicz, Julius Caesar, a whole bunch of stuff. And I said, give me something like the Nautilus that Harper Goff did. And that was the inspiration for our Time Machine.
So beautiful.
Thank you. I wish he were alive
Yes, right over.
Thank you so much for coming down for this.
Oh, I was so flattered to be asked. I didn't think anybody would show up, so this is awesome.
I'm a huge fan of 7% Solution and West End horror and this, and I don't know if you're a fan of the Victorian era or you just fake it really well, but I want to know what first drew you to the Victorian era, because you do it so well.
The short answer, for a change, is love of the English language. 19th century English literature, whether you're talking about Dickens or George Eliot or Arthur Conan Doyle or Anthony Hope or H. Rider Haggard or any of those guys, I like the way it sounds. I like the way it flows. I've now finished my 6th Sherlock Holmes novel, which will come out in August. Sherlock Holmes and the Telegram from Hell. Write that down. And so which is interesting because it's like writing in a foreign language. You know, it's not the way you normally talk. And for example, there's a great example of it. It just occurred to me in the movie. You know that phrase, "My ma didn't raise no stupid children." In Victorian, it says, "My mother was rather an atrocious woman in her way, but her many failings did not include raising mentally deficient sons." A little bit of a mouthful to, anyway, yeah, so that's the shortest answer I can give you is that I just, I'm very big on narrative. I just want to know what happens next. Turn the page, stay to the end, and things like that.
And just a note on that, one of the things I love about this film is the language you give to Jack, and the way that obviously he is a monster, but that you make him a human monster, and you show the camaraderie between these two friends. You almost see the boyish childhood between them throughout the film. They're gentlemen to each other at the same time that this guy's a menacing monster.
I think the best villains are the ones you sort of can understand. I hate when you're in a conference with executives and they say, "But is so-and-so sympathetic?" I don't give a fuck whether he's sympathetic. I really want to know if you just understand them. I'm not sure Richard III is conventionally sympathetic, but you do understand him. He's got a lot of reasons to read his book. And I think that the Ripper's version of life, or his vision of life, which is, we're hunted, that's how it's always been, doesn't seem to have changed very much. The television scene sort of proves him right. But he does at the end, in his last exchange with Wells, which is silent, and sort of acknowledge the conclusion of their game, their chess game, whatever.
We have time for 2 more questions.
It's stolen from The Third Man, by the way. At the end of The Third Man, at the end of The Third Man, Orson Welles looks at Joseph Cotton and goes, and then you hear the shot. Yeah, sorry.
It was just so incredible to watch it again on screen. I think the last time I saw it was maybe about a decade ago on screen. And I would like to speak to what you had mentioned earlier about what's omitted. And one of the things that's so powerful, especially in the first murder, is when you see this anticipation, you hear the music, we as an audience kind of suspect what's going to happen, and then just to have that kind of ripping sound with the blood, I mean, that is much more horrible than any Saw movie or anything that I could potentially imagine. Well, obviously I could, because it was getting pretty scary up in here, but that was so beautiful. The other thing is the performances in this film are just...
I thought I was a really great director,
I
but they
think
were
so.
falling in love.
I think so, exactly.
I look at the dailies and I say, boy, you've got this thing down with the acting. Herb Jaffe's wife, Nell, said, "I think they're having an affair." And I said, no, this is acting. Yeah, so that helped.
what's really great is maybe it's coming from theater, but the courage it took to just give Malcolm those moments of discovery, of being that wide-eyed boy, of seeing him learn, and to keep the film rolling there instead of just kind of having to force any kind of narrative, because that to me is what's so magic.
He's a very intelligent actor, and he leapt at this because after Clockwork Orange, he was always being typecast as Caligula or somebody, and when I said I wanted him, he said, but he always plays the bad guy, and I said, yes, but this time he'll play the good guy, and that's acting. They wanted Mick Jagger for the Ripper, and I said, no, I don't think so. I could believe him as the Ripper. I was just not sure I would believe him as a Harley Street surgeon. So they said, you mean you won't even meet with him? And that's when I started to realize how you wheel and deal. And I said, okay, so I'll meet. So I went and met with him, and neither of us knew quite what to say. He was touring. He was very tired. And I said, okay, I met with him, and I still would prefer, David Warner. But you said something before we were talking about the acting. You were talking about some other...
Yeah, it was the what's omitted.
Oh,
the power.
It was a philosophical choice, which is that I always think when I see the really violent stuff that I'm looking at effects. I mean, I certainly hope I'm looking at effects, and that it's not real. And it also does not exploit what I profoundly believe art should do, which is to exploit the imagination. When I was a kid, I saw for the first time the Laurence Olivier movie of Henry V. And it really was a movie that sort of changed my life, along with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Because it showed me what you can do with limitations. That not only can the play not show you the Battle of Agincourt, because it's just a play, but also because the people making this particular movie during World War II, and it was a setup for D-Day, they had $1.75 to make this movie. So they turned all their limitations into strengths, which is what I tried to do with the time travel scene in The Voices, because I knew I couldn't compete with George Powell. And so in Henry V, there's a narrator. And the narrator says, on your imaginary forces, work. Think when we speak of horses, that you see them planting their proud hoofs in the receiving earth. For 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? On your imaginary forces, work. And that hit me big time. So I don't like to show literal violence, because I think I can make you more disturbed by contributing to it yourselves.
Thank you. And I agree, especially when you got the sound effects. What am I listening to?
No, I'm not telling. But I'll tell you the other moment that was stolen, because all these moments are stolen. All art is cut and paste. It's just, Shakespeare didn't invent half his plots. It's all cut and paste. Many years ago, they did this wonderful television series of I, Claudius. I don't know how many people saw I, Claudius. Well, in I, Claudius, Messalina gets her head chopped off. And the soldier lifts up her head, you see the knife, and the camera does a swish pan, and the scream is cut off, and that was it. And I added the blood tear at the end. But so I cut and paste and just add a little something, and again, you don't see anything, but that was the only time I ever screamed in front of a television set.
We have time for one more, but it's a really quick question I'm curious about, because it was very clear that you really wanted David Warner for your Jack, and I'm wondering if you can recall what you'd seen him in, or that informed that decision. This is my Jack.
I loved him as Mr. Blifil in Tom Jones, and I also loved him as in the eponymous title role in Morgan, A Suitable Case for Treatment, which is a Carol Rice movie where he plays a kind of a bonkers artist who winds up slightly trapped in a King Kong outfit. It's a very strange, wacky movie from the 60s, Morgan, A Suitable Case for Treatment. And I think those were the ones. And I really like David. I used him in Star Trek 6 as well.
I don't really have a question, but I think I wouldn't forgive myself if I didn't go for it and embarrass myself in front of you, the great Nick Meyer. But I'm a screenwriter. I've just gone off strike. I'm all done. I've been on the picket line every day for the last 101 days. But anyway, I wrote a film in 2016 that was so heavily influenced by you. I am so influenced by you. About a girl who can't age, about a woman who can't age, and it was set in San Francisco. And Netflix, even though I got to number 2 on Netflix world, I got this much.
And so, yeah, some judge years ago, when Art Buchwald was suing Paramount Pictures over an Eddie Murphy movie that he'd come up with, the judge said that their accounting methods were, quote, unconscionable. What was the name of your movie?
It's called The Age of Adeline.
I think Gary Lucchese, one of the
Yes, he was.
Gary Lucchese, my agent for many years, and also ran Paramount Pictures, and my tennis partner. To beat the shit out of me.
I wrote Anyway, I just wanted to say I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say.
I have one issue with your movie. And it's either you or Tom Rosenberg has to answer this. But I said, nobody involved with this movie ever had a pet, because she has a dog.
Right.
Nobody ever walks the dog. Nobody ever feeds the dog. We never see the dog being taken care of. It's not like I'm asking for my money back.
But I just wanted to so much of who I am is because of Nicholas Meyer, Nick Meyer, and Malcolm so much. I just wanted to come out and say thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, as far as we might, we cannot invent magical moments like that. So everyone, it's a wonderful place to stop. So everyone, please, one more round of applause. Thank you so much for coming out. Out of curiosity, does it surprise you to have over 100 people come out to watch time after time in 2023? I'm like, where am I? In 2023?
I said I was astounded. We drove down here, and I said I hope my heart doesn't sort of sink and there's 4 people or something. Well, you can laugh, but these are the things people like me worry about.
Give it up for yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.